Trident II didn't take off. A nuclear missile fell within a few meters of a British nuclear submarine and nearly overwhelmed the entire British military leadership. This is what a real Trident II missile launch looks like, unless it is performed by brave submariners from a British nuclear submarine. For nearly 2 months, the British Admiralty has been crowing that the long-awaited launch of a sea-based intercontinental ballistic missile was about to finally take place from their recently modernized Avangard-type submarine cruiser. That's one of the parts for Royal Navy strategic cruisers. The youngest of them is now a quarter of a century old. They've been wanting to write them off since 2017, and local reporters like to make fun of them in every way possible. There is a joke, for example, that anyone who sees them pairing off to sea will become incredibly rich. But that will never happen because 3 of the 4 are necessarily under repair. This fighting quartet is the last stronghold of the former empire. Her only weapon, you might say, of the Day of Judgment. It is true that the most dangerous missiles have not been tested on them since 2016. And it wasn't because old Britain didn't want to shake her former greatness. On the contrary, the island's politicians have recently made statements as if they still had a solid arsenal of nuclear warheads behind them, or at least a great navy. And the British Empire still occupies half the world, or just has a real opportunity to respond to Russia's imaginary nuclear threats. But the reasons for the delay of the US Trident II missile tests, that main arsenal of Avangard boats, had a much simpler explanation. All the while, the British were agreeing with the Americans on just one demonstrative launch, proving their indomitable determination and waiting for the White House's response. It's no secret that no supposedly British Trident can take off without US authorization, either in an emergency or during testing. And as of today, no matter how you look at it, the United Kingdom until the late 1990s, which had its own nuclear sphere, the triad of nuclear power can only be called conventionally. In the BBC photo, Vanguard certainly looks like a real monster of the depths, but in reality rarely dares to leave the home base. The Americans were in no hurry to give permission either. They had plenty of formal as well as well-founded arguments for this. In the last 2 years alone, the British Vanguard submarine cruisers have had enough accidents to last another fleet for 20 years. And they were all in the number 1 category, threatening not only the crew, but the entire inhabitants of our beautiful planet. First, in November 22, the second nuclear-powered submarine of the series, Victorious, suffered a fire during a combat cruise. About the consequences of the incident, the press service of the US Navy preferred not to spread. But judging by the fact that the boat lost power and was pulled hundreds of kilometers away on a tugboat to the native Scottish base, Clyde, for the place of the top-secret mission, the case was bad. The nuclear-powered submarine, by the way, carried at least 8 spin 2, and the severity of the damage is indicated by the fact that she has not been to sea since. The second story was even worse. Here, by the way, are the specs of the British APL Vanguard class in an easy-to-understand infographic from the Daily Mail. And so recently, at the end of November 23rd, another Vanguard nearly went down due to a hardware malfunction. One of the depth gauges broke, and no one on the bridge even noticed that the boat had already passed the dangerous depth and confidently continued its dive. The fall into the water was avoided thanks to the vigilance of the aft compartment specialists, who fortunately had a working instrument. The Royal Navy declined to comment on the threat level, although ubiquitous British tabloid journalists got to those involved and found out that things were on edge. And in such a state, the British Navy was eager to show that it too could still do something. It was as if the Americans felt something when they extended them so much time. Only time with a start authorization, and it's as good as gone. It's probably best for Vanguards to go only with an escort, though it won't help if something irreparable happens. And recent trends are healthy. So, the Trident II missile test from a Vanguard-class submarine lasted just under 15 seconds. According to the British press, quote, the 57-ton rocket lifted a few meters and plummeted just a few yards from the boat. End quote. Funny thing is, directly on a submarine cruiser. Present at this moment were the kingdom's Minister of Defense, Grand Chefs, and several top officials of the Navy. It would have been an embarrassment if the ill-fated Trident II had blown a few yards in the right direction. I'm sure they would have found a Russian trail. In general, the High Command suffered a lot of fear. And there's no one to punish. The Royal Navy has too big a manpower problem to throw away. No one wants to serve there. This is not the first wake-up call to the entire NATO nuclear triad, to which mostly The answers are answered by the US. They too have quite a few problems with land Minutemen, and recent tests have also ended in failure. Only 50% of the dozen previous ones were successful at all. Seems to be in pursuit of smart guns, in quotes. The US and NATO do not have ready solutions for a full-fledged renewal of the nuclear arsenal today, and are not expected to do so before the end of this decade. And I'd like to tell you about one of the big scams, namely Comanche 2. Americans again spent billions on a helicopter that won't fly anywhere. This is what the Lockheed Sikorsky firm intended the new helicopter far from it to look like. The Sikorsky Raider X prototype could take off before the end of 2024, but now that will never happen. Good repeat. This seems to be the principle that guided Bell, Textron Inc. and Sikorsky, now a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin, when they started a competition to design the newest helicopter for the U.S. Army. The previous attempt to design a helicopter of the future within the Light Helicopter Experimental Program was instantly recalled. This famous story has long been cited as one of the prime examples of grand corruption in the U.S. military-industrial sector and has become a true legend in the field of defense SOPs. Recall that for 12 years, starting in 1992, Sikorsky's design office, then still owned by Boeing, designed and built the Super Portrait prototype. Popper became a helicopter capable of flying at tremendous speeds for that type of machine while remaining invisible to radar. The new products, called RAC-66 Comanche, were dedicated to computer games, presentations, and even an episode of the Hollywood action movie about the Green Thug Hulk. What can I say? The shape he was given was bizarre and very movie-like. The actual living embodiment of the sci-fi movie sagas of the Star Wars era. The RAC-66 Comanche, unlike Farah's new project, at least flew, and for quite a while. The only problem is that it flew poorly and was very expensive. But one thing is beautiful outlines and design frills, and quite another is real combat capabilities of the machine. And with this helicopter, which cost by design creators almost 3 times more expensive than the famous Apache, was not very. Weak armament and no armor could not compensate for the design or the advertising campaigns in support of this marvel of technology. Sikorsky ended up building 2 operational prototypes, each of which cost the U.S. military budget in 2014. For $0.4 billion. And that was the end of the program. Naturally, no one was held responsible for that story. They just quietly tried to forget. Although abuse and misuse of funds was recorded at literally every stage of the construction of the ill-fated Comanche. The development firms, having received a solid compensation for the program's cancellation, promised to take into account the mistakes of the past and not to repeat them in the future. But it seems the only experience they've had is that money can be made without much effort and answer to no one in case of failure. In December 2018, the Pentagon's new helicopter program, FARA, involved the same people who made a nice sawing off of the untimely deceased Comanche. The FARA was conceived as a rotary-wing reconnaissance attack aircraft, by design and specification of the U.S. military. It was to be a compact, lightweight helicopter capable of supporting special operations teams and striking both day and night, without regard to weather and light conditions. In 2021, the corporation unveiled 2 prototypes, each costing the Pentagon more than $1 billion per unit. Both models, the Bell 360 Invictus and the Sikorsky Raider X, were going to be piloted before the end of this year. But something went wrong. To launch the trial runs, the 2 firms demanded $5 billion from the military department. The Star-Spangled Banner military scratched their heads and decided to close the dubious shop. The whole thing was too much like the financial black hole with Comanche, where the $9 billion military budget was sucked into without a trace. This time it only took 5 years and $3 billion to realize the futility of the idea. As General James Rainey, who oversaw the program, stated, quote, "We've accomplished big things, big progress. We have momentum. The vast majority of our landmark efforts to design a new machine happened either on time or ahead of schedule and began to turn into opportunities. But new war conditions created new expectations, and so the FARA program is being shut down, as are the Shadow and Raven unmanned programs. This is the 4th attempt since '92 to make a reconnaissance attack helicopter for the U.S. Army. All of them were failures, and Comanche and FARA are also extremely with the same zero exhaust. But helicopter manufacturers do not have to be sad about it. In 2025, the Pentagon plans to conduct a new helicopter tender already under the Future Long-Range Assailed Aircraft program. So there's no time to be discouraged. It's time to hit the ground running with renewed effort.